Look, I need to be straight with you about something that's happening right now in the precious metals market. Something that most people aren't paying attention to, but should be. Because what we're witnessing isn't just another bull market cycle. This is different. This is structural. And the window to position yourself properly is closing faster than most realize. Gold just closed one of its strongest years since 1979. We're talking about a 60% surge with more than 50 all-time highs. Silver's been even more explosive. But here's what nobody's talking about. This isn't speculation driving these moves. This is central banks. This is institutions. This is smart money that knows something the general public hasn't figured out yet. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening behind the scenes. Central banks around the world have been accumulating gold at levels we haven't seen in decades. Not just buying a little here and there. I'm talking about systematic, aggressive accumulation. The kind of buying that tells you they're preparing for something. The kind of buying that happens when institutions lose faith in the current system. And it's not just any central banks. It's the ones that matter. China's been adding to reserves month after month. Russia accelerated their purchases years ago and never stopped. India, Turkey, Poland, countries that understand monetary history are stacking physical metal like their economic sovereignty depends on it. Because it does. Think about what that means for a second. These are the people with access to the best information in the world. They sit in rooms where monetary policy gets decided. They see the debt levels. They know the currency creation numbers. They understand the mathematics of what's coming. And they're converting their dollar reserves into gold as fast as they can without causing panic. Now, JP Morgan just came out with a forecast that should make everyone sit up and pay attention. They're projecting gold could hit $5,400 by 2027. That's not some fringe newsletter making wild predictions. That's one of the largest financial institutions in the world telling their clients that gold has another 60% to run from current levels. And you know what? I think they're being conservative. Because here's what most analysts miss when they're building their models. They're looking at historical correlations. They're plugging in interest rates and inflation expectations and dollar strength. But they're not accounting for the regime change that's happening in global monetary architecture. They're not pricing in what happens when the world's reserve currency loses that status. They're not modeling the end game of a debt spiral that has no mathematical solution. Let me take you back to 1971 for a moment. August 15th, Nixon closes the gold window, tells the world that dollars are no longer redeemable for gold, promises it's temporary. 54 years later, we're still waiting for that temporary measure to end. But here's what happened next that everyone should remember. Gold was $35 an ounce when Nixon made that announcement. By 1980, it hit $850. That's a 24x move in less than a decade. But it wasn't immediate. There was a lag. People didn't understand what had just happened. The dollar was still the dollar. Life went on. Prices at the grocery store didn't change overnight. It took time for the implications to work through the system, for people to realize that their currency was now backed by nothing but faith in a government that was already $400 billion in debt. Sound familiar? Because we're in a similar moment right now. Except the numbers are so much bigger they're almost incomprehensible. We're not talking about $400 billion in debt anymore. We're talking about $36 trillion, with a T. And that's just the official number. That doesn't include unfunded liabilities. That doesn't include state and local debt. That doesn't include the derivatives exposure in the banking system that makes 2008 look like a practice run. The difference between 1971 and now is that back then, the world didn't have an alternative. The dollar was still the cleanest dirty shirt. Other currencies were worse. But today we've got countries actively building payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. We've got BRICS nations settling trade in their own currencies. We've got central banks that watched what happened to Russia's dollar reserves and decided they need a plan B. And that plan B is gold. Because gold is the only asset that's nobody else's liability. It's the only form of money that can't be printed, can't be sanctioned, can't be frozen in a bank account somewhere. It's the ultimate neutral reserve asset. And the smart money figured this out years ago. Let me tell you about something that happened in the COMEX gold market recently that should terrify anyone who understands how these markets work. We saw a massive delivery month where the amount of gold standing for delivery was unprecedented. Usually, most futures contracts get rolled forward. People don't actually want the physical metal. They're just trading paper contracts for price exposure. But something changed. Suddenly, entities were standing for delivery. They wanted the actual gold. They wanted it out of the warehouse and in their possession. You know what that tells me? It tells me that sophisticated players don't trust the paper market anymore. They don't believe that when push comes to shove, there's going to be enough physical gold to back all those paper claims. And they're probably right, because the ratio of paper gold to physical gold in the system is estimated to be somewhere between 100 to 1 and 250 to 1, depending on who you ask. That means for every ounce of actual gold that exists, there are 100 to 250 claims on that same ounce. What happens when everyone shows up to claim their gold at the same time? It's the same thing that happens when everyone tries to withdraw their money from a bank during a bank run. The system breaks. Except this time, there's no FDIC insurance for your gold contracts. There's no government backstop. There's just a cash settlement at whatever price they decide to give you. And this is why the people who understand the game are buying physical metal and taking possession. They're not leaving it in allocated accounts at banks. They're not trusting ETFs that may or may not have the gold they claim to have. They're getting the actual metal and storing it where they control it. Now, I want to talk about something that affects a lot of people watching this, especially if you've been saving for retirement. If you've got $100,000 or more sitting in traditional retirement accounts, 401s, 402s, 403s, IRAs, that kind of thing, you need to understand that you have options most people don't know about. There's a way to get physical gold into your retirement account without triggering taxes or penalties. It's called a Gold IRA, and I put together a free guide that walks through exactly how it works. It's in the description below. Covers the whole process, the rules, what to watch out for. Worth checking out if you're sitting on significant retirement savings and you're concerned about where this is all heading. Anyway, let me get back to what's happening in the market right now. Silver's been doing something even more interesting than gold. It's been outperforming on a percentage basis, which makes sense when you understand the fundamentals. Silver has this unique characteristic where it's both a monetary metal and an industrial metal. About half of silver demand comes from industrial applications: solar panels, electronics, electric vehicles, medical equipment, the stuff that's supposedly going to power the green energy transition. But here's the problem. We're not producing enough silver to meet demand. Mine supply has been relatively flat for years, and unlike gold, silver gets consumed. When you use silver in a solar panel or a circuit board, it's gone. You're not getting that back. It's not like jewelry that can be melted down and recycled. So we're drawing down above-ground inventories while demand keeps increasing. The math on this is pretty straightforward. If demand exceeds supply and inventories are declining, eventually you run out. And when you run out of a critical industrial metal that's also a monetary metal that central banks and investors want, the price has to go higher. A lot higher. High enough to either destroy demand or incentivize enough new production to balance the market. But new silver production doesn't just appear overnight. It takes years to bring a new mine online. You've got to find the deposit, get the permits, build the infrastructure, start extraction. We're talking 7 to 10 years minimum. So even if silver goes to $100 an ounce tomorrow, it's not going to solve the supply deficit for the better part of a decade. This is why some analysts are projecting silver could hit triple digits in this cycle. Not because of speculation, not because of hype, but because the physical fundamentals are so tight that the market has no choice but to ration supply through price, and when that happens, the moves can be violent. Silver went from $8 to $50 in less than a year during the 2011 run. It can move fast when the conditions are right, and the conditions right now are better than they were in 2011. Back then, it was mostly retail investors driving the move. This time, you've got institutions involved, you've got ETF flows, you've got industrial users panicking about supply, you've got monetary demand from people who understand that silver is real money, not just a commodity. Let me tell you a story about what happened in 1980 that most people don't know. Everyone knows silver hit $50 an ounce. Everyone knows the Hunt brothers tried to corner the market. But what most people don't know is what was happening in the background. Inflation was running at 13%. Interest rates were in the high teens. The dollar was losing purchasing power so fast that people were genuinely scared. They didn't trust the currency. They didn't trust the banks. They wanted something real. And silver was accessible. Gold was already expensive. But silver? Silver was something regular people could afford. They could go to their local coin shop and buy a few ounces. They could protect themselves without needing thousands of dollars. And that's exactly what they did. The demand was so intense that premiums on physical silver went through the roof. You couldn't find it. Dealers were sold out. Mints couldn't keep up with demand. We're starting to see echoes of that now. Premiums on physical silver have been elevated for months. Delivery times are stretching out. The disconnect between the paper price and the physical price is widening. That's a sign that the paper market is losing control. That the real price discovery is happening in the physical market, not on the COMEX. And when that happens, when the paper market loses credibility, that's when you get the explosive moves. Because suddenly all those paper contracts that people thought were as good as physical metal turn out to be just promises. And promises don't spend when you need to buy food or pay bills or protect your wealth. Now let's talk about what's happening with the dollar, because this is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to acknowledge. The dollar's strength over the past few years has been artificial. It's been strong relative to other currencies, sure. But that's like being the tallest building in a city that's sinking into the ocean. It doesn't mean you're not going underwater. The dollar's strength has been maintained through interest rate differentials and the fact that it's still the reserve currency. But both of those factors are eroding. Interest rates can't stay high forever when you're paying interest on $36 trillion in debt. Do the math on that. Every percentage point of interest is $360 billion a year in interest payments. We're already spending more on interest than we spend on defense, more than we spend on most discretionary programs. And that's with rates that are historically not even that high. What happens when rates go higher? What happens when the bond market decides it wants more compensation for the risk of lending money to a government that's running trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see? Either rates go up and the interest payments become unsustainable, or the Fed steps in and starts buying bonds again. And if the Fed starts buying bonds again, that's money printing. That's currency debasement. That's inflation. And if rates go down because the Fed's buying bonds, then the dollar loses its interest rate advantage. Then there's no reason for foreign investors to hold dollars. Then the capital flows reverse. Then you get the currency crisis that everyone's been warning about but nobody thinks will actually happen. This is the trap we're in. There's no good option. Every path leads to the same place, a weaker dollar and higher gold prices. The only question is how fast we get there and how chaotic the journey is. I want you to think about what's happening in the BRICS nations for a minute. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These aren't small economies. China's the second largest economy in the world. India's growing faster than almost anyone. Russia's got resources. Brazil's got agriculture. Together, they represent a massive chunk of global GDP and population. And they're all moving away from the dollar. Not because they hate America, not because of politics, because it's in their economic interest, because they watched what happened when the US froze Russia's dollar reserves. They saw that the dollar isn't just a currency anymore. It's a weapon. And if it can be used as a weapon, then it's not a reliable store of value. It's not a neutral reserve asset. So they're building alternatives. They're settling trade in yuan and rupees and rubles. They're talking about a BRICS currency backed by commodities. They're accumulating gold because gold can't be sanctioned. Gold can't be frozen. Gold is the ultimate neutral asset that every country accepts. This is a slow-motion train wreck for dollar dominance. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's happening. And every month that goes by, more trade gets settled in non-dollar currencies. More central banks diversify away from dollars. More countries join the BRICS coalition or align with it economically. And as that happens, the demand for dollars decreases. The need to hold dollars decreases. And when demand for something decreases while the supply keeps increasing, because we're still printing dollars to fund deficits, the value goes down. It's basic economics. Now, here's where this gets really interesting for gold and silver. As the dollar weakens, as faith in fiat currencies generally weakens, where does money go? It goes to real assets. It goes to things that can't be printed. It goes to commodities, real estate, and precious metals. But real estate's not portable. You can't take your house with you if you need to move. Commodities are bulky and expensive to store. But gold and silver? Gold and silver are portable wealth. They're money that's been recognized as money for thousands of years. They're the ultimate insurance policy against monetary chaos. And we're heading into a period of monetary chaos. Not might be, not could be. We are. The math doesn't work anymore. The debt can't be paid back. The promises can't be kept. The system is going to reset one way or another. And when it does, the people who positioned themselves correctly beforehand are going to be fine. The people who didn't are going to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between currency and money. Let me tell you about something that happened in 2008 that's relevant here. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, when the financial system was on the brink, gold didn't crash. It had a brief dip as people liquidated everything for cash, but then it took off. It went from $800 an ounce to $1,900 in less than 3 years. Because people realized that the system wasn't as stable as they thought, that the banks weren't as safe as they thought, that they needed something outside the system. We're in a similar moment now, except the problems are bigger. The debt levels are higher. The derivatives exposure is larger. The geopolitical tensions are worse. and the central banks have already used most of their ammunition. Interest rates were at zero for years. They printed trillions. They bought everything that wasn't nailed down. What do they do for an encore when the next crisis hits? More of the same, probably. Except this time, people are going to notice. This time, the inflation's going to be obvious. This time, the currency debasement is going to be impossible to hide. And this time, gold and silver are going to go to levels that seem impossible right now. JP Morgan's $5,400 forecast for gold by 2027? That might be the floor, not the ceiling, because they're modeling a relatively orderly transition. They're assuming the system muddles through. They're not pricing in a real crisis. They're not pricing in a loss of confidence in the dollar. They're not pricing in what happens when the paper gold market breaks. And the paper gold market is going to break. It has to. The leverage is too high. The claims on physical metal are too many. The trust is too low. When it breaks, when people realize that their gold ETF shares might not be redeemable for actual gold, when they understand that their futures contracts are going to be cash settled at prices that don't reflect the real physical market, that's when you get the moonshot. That's when gold doesn't go up 10% or 20% or even 50%. That's when it goes up multiples. That's when silver goes to triple digits. That's when the people who own physical metal in their possession realize they made the right decision. And here's the thing, you can't wait until that happens to act. Because when it happens, you won't be able to get physical metal. The premiums will be astronomical. The wait times will be months. The dealers will be sold out, just like in 1980, just like in 2008, just like every time there's a crisis and people panic into real assets. The time to position yourself is when things seem relatively calm, when you can still get metal at reasonable premiums, when dealers have inventory, when you're not competing with millions of other people who just figured out what's happening. Think about the people who bought gold at $300 an ounce in the early 2000s. Everyone thought they were crazy. Gold had been in a bear market for 20 years. Nobody wanted it. It was a barbarous relic. It didn't pay interest. It just sat there. But those people understood something that the market didn't. They understood that the money printing that started after the dot-com crash was going to have consequences. They understood that the housing bubble was going to end badly. They understood that the system was fragile. And they positioned themselves accordingly. And they were rewarded. Gold went from $300 to $1,900, a 6x return. Silver went from $4 to $50, a 12x return. The people who bought and held through the volatility, through the corrections, through the periods where it seemed like nothing was happening, they did extremely well. We're in a similar setup now. Actually, we're in a better setup, because the problems are bigger. The debt is higher. The money printing has been more aggressive. The geopolitical situation is more unstable. And the central banks are already buying, which they weren't doing in the early 2000s. So when I see gold at $3,400 and silver at $30, I don't see metals that are expensive. I see metals that are still cheap relative to where they're going. I see an opportunity that's not going to last much longer. I see a chance to protect wealth and potentially grow it significantly before the crowd figures out what's happening. Because the crowd always figures it out eventually. They always do. But they figure it out late. They figure it out after the easy gains have been made. They figure it out when they're buying at the top, driven by fear and FOMO, paying premiums they shouldn't have to pay. Don't be the crowd. Don't wait until gold's at $5,000 and silver's at $100 and everyone's talking about it and you can't find physical metal anywhere. Don't wait until the crisis is obvious and the solutions are limited and the prices reflect the panic. The smart money is moving now. The central banks are buying now. The institutions are positioning now. The people who understand monetary history and market structure are accumulating now. While it's still possible, while premiums are still reasonable, while dealers still have inventory, because every day that passes is a day closer to the moment when the system breaks, when the paper markets lose credibility, when the dollar's reserve status erodes beyond repair, when gold and silver do what they've always done during monetary crises. They preserve wealth and provide a bridge to whatever comes next. This isn't about getting rich quick. This isn't about speculation. This is about protection. This is about having real money when currency fails. This is about being on the right side of the greatest wealth transfer in history. The question isn't whether gold and silver are going higher. The question is whether you're going to position yourself before they do. Whether you're going to be one of the people who saw it coming and acted, or one of the people who understood it too late and paid the price for hesitation. Don't let another day pass without stacking, because the days are running out. The window is closing, and when it closes, When the crisis everyone's been warning about finally arrives, it's going to be too late to prepare. You prepare before the storm, not during it. You buy insurance before the house burns down, not after. The storm is coming. The house is already on fire. The only question is whether you're protected when the flames reach your door.